And joining us right now, we have Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Hello, my friend. It's nice to see you during this holiday season. And I do want your reaction on this Washington Post report. Are there certain parts of President Biden's presidency that likely left him wanting more? Does it surprise you, with Trump's inauguration looming, that he still believes he would have beaten him?
You know, Alex, look, I'm a person at this point that is looking forward. I think that all Democrats have got to take a lesson from what happened in the last election. The president, look, he did a good job in the 4 years that he was done. We did not do, any of us. I don't think the White House did a good job, but I don't think members of Congress did a good job talking about the bipartisan bill. Infrastructure bill or the IRA bill and how it helped people. I think none of us listened to how people were hurting. I did. I knew. I go to the grocery store on Sundays and hear people talking about the cost of eggs. So, you know, how much of this is speculation? How much of it's real? Joe Biden's a human being. He wanted to do a good job as president. He looked at running again. I think we all have to learn from what happened. No one person's responsible for what happened. We all are. And we've got to look forward to what's going to happen in the next 4 years.
All right, then let's look forward together, because it appears that the U.S. allies should be ready for another roller coaster period after Trump took to social media on Christmas with an expansionist agenda against Panama, Greenland, and Canada. First of all, is there any shred of legitimacy here? Is Trump's bluster is it one of his negotiation tactics?
Okay, so I do not ever try to be a mind reader on President Trump. I have predicted things very accurately, like he was going to win in 2016, and he could win this time. But you've heard how foreign countries have reacted to what he has said and the kind of controversy, probably war, that it would cause. So there are issues with the Panama Canal. I think I know why he wants Greenland. Canada, I don't know. My district's north of Canada in parts of my district. But I don't think it's something that is probably realistic or something that would happen peacefully. And, you know, we'll see where this discussion goes, this debate goes. But I do think he'd have to consult Congress as well.
Yeah, but let me compare with his first term, because Trump largely said these kinds of things on, a whim. But he knows more now about how things really work. And with Greenland, apparently he's approaching buying it and framing it as a national security issue. Will framings like this give Trump's wishes more legitimacy in Congress? I mean, you mentioned Congress would have to prove these things. Or do even your Republican colleagues balk at this?
You know, it's very interesting to watch my Republican colleagues right now, who most of them go along with what he says or are trying to decide about how they're going to react to what he says. I think that many of them are going to care about what the international consequences are, what other foreign countries are going to say. I don't think any of them wants to see a war. I actually think that Trump has picked someone who will be a strong Secretary of State. I hope he's going to listen to maybe what his advice is going to be. But, you know, predicting Donald Trump is not something that anybody's really developed an art of, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah, well, you're right. I do want to touch on how things are shaping up for the next Congress, because yesterday your Democratic colleague, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, had this to say about the race for Oversight Committee chair. Let's take a listen.
I think that both are absolutely qualified. I do think that within the Democratic caucus, we are really stuck in our old ways of doing things, which is you get there by seniority. And so if you've been there longer, then you get the post. And I don't think that we fully sit there and say who may be best equipped for this moment.
All right, so Virginia Representative Jerry Connolly beat out New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is one of the more high-profile Democrats in the House, and she is quite media savvy. Is this a missed opportunity, and is there an inherent reluctance in the Democratic Party to embrace generational changes in Congress?
So, Alex, I'm going to be really blunt about this, because this is really one of bugaboos that I have right now. I think we need to look at each race. I respect Alex a great deal. She is my friend. I called and asked her to come to Michigan and campaigned with her. I think representative government means that you have representative government. You need young people and you need senior people with seasoning. I think Alex has got an outstanding future. The way she handled running, the way that she lost, but her graciousness, her civility, her seasoning is showing. And I want to say that about you. She has a future. There were 2 other races that seniority did not win in. Actually 3, if you look at the fact that Jamie Raskin is now going to be chair of the Judiciary Committee. The Agriculture Committee was won by Angie Craig, and Natural Resources was won by Jared Huffman. So there were legitimate races, and I think people vote on the person. I think we have to make sure that people that are qualified and can do the job are elected, and we've got to stop bashing people because they're old or the young. Everybody should be judged on who they are, what they are, the job that they can do.
Okay, message delivered loud and clear, and we appreciate that. Always your candor. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, and happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.